How can small software teams be effective? Small software teams can consist of, for example, just 2 people. And this is exactly what we're going to talk about here with an interview with Carsten Holm. He and me together, we are bringing in around 40 years of combined experience in this interview, where you now see the best parts of it. In this video, we also talk about the best practice of when you should buy a software from another vendor or when you should make it yourself. In big software teams, we usually have a product manager, a product owner, a scrum master, and then a couple of developers. But what if we have a tiny software team? What if we only have 1 developer and 1 product owner? Then the dynamics change a bit and the product owner needs to do many more tasks. These tasks are not just the management of the developer, it's also knowing exactly what the product should be, and it is also self-management, and then additionally it is stakeholder management. And in this video we have a couple of tips from someone I interviewed. Now you ask, who's Carsten Holm? He's a PLM consultant from Germany. PLM is Product Lifecycle Management. This is a software that I didn't know before. He's a consultant for that, so he helps his client to implement these systems for their clients. And this is how he explains it.
Yeah, happy to do that. Actually, myself, I'm Carsten Holm. I'm in Berlin. Actually, I come from the procurement purchasing. I was in several positions, different company leading the purchasing, but also helped them and was involved in changing ERP systems or implementing supply chain tools or product lifecycle management tools in project management in different companies, which is basically digitalizing of the product development.
The first learning from this interview is the under-specification of software or the over-specification of software. And that's important, especially in a tiny software team, because you will take a lot of time specifying software. And Carsten explained this to me in a really well way, where he used the Pareto principle to tell me how he applies this. When does he actually stop to specify software and when he thinks it's enough?
I would say the rest 20% is always good not to come from the product owner, actually. Yeah, so it should come from the people itself related, but it should be filtered. Yeah, it should come from the users because they know better than anyone else, actually. But the most important and tricky part is that you need to filter it and not say, okay, fine, what you say, and you say, this is, we implement it. This is doesn't work. This is a stupid way.
I like this notion of specifying 80% yourself and then 20% for the users, because users often don't really know what they want. In a software project, when they're inside a sprint, if the developers ask the product managers, product owners too many questions inside the sprint, then it's underspecified. On the other side, it's overspecified if someone who's specifying, let's say in this case the product owner, is taking many turns. Anytime the software takes another turn and anytime the software changes direction, then a lot of specification needs to be rewritten. If that's the case, it's overspecified. Usually people tell me you should err on the side of underspecification, and there's quite a bit of research about this, but from my experience, usually people underspecify things and they should do more. That's just my personal opinion. Developers need to understand the business domain. This is super important for tiny teams because there's not so much time for training. Usually tiny teams work on software for a shorter period of time as well. And also if there's, let's say, only 1 developer and that developer has a gap in knowledge, there's always a ping back with a product owner. So the developer cannot just quickly ask another developer.
The challenge always was, or I would say is, that a developer not coming from the usual business process needs to understand what are the business cases and what are the challenges actually, and what exactly the customer wants. And then he can actually think about what and how actually to implement this. And so it's pretty much important, and that was also my part, actually to work very close with the developer together and also to draw processes or concepts and actually also explaining them in detail. So what needs to be done in order to, not in case of programming, but how it should work and how the process should be.
I totally resonate with that and I fully agree. My first insurance client, I worked probably around 3 months without pushing any code. I was just reading the code, reading specification, talking with people about the insurance business before I just had an initial grasp on the business domain. So whenever we are talking about some new software that needs to get built, we need to bring in someone who is already versed in that business domain. And this is where actually the time saving comes in, especially for tiny teams. Transparency is king. Of course, we are German, we are accurate, we are honest, and we like to document things and be transparent usually. But there's a practical aspect to that, especially when it comes to timelines that shift, especially when there are deadlines missed. And Carsten has a good opinion on that, and he explains why transparency is actually very important.
Usually you have a timeline, and then you say, and within this timeline, that's also my experience. I would like to have this in this model and module. But when you start in the project, you just have an estimated timeline. People get ill, other systems struggle, you have interface issues, you need to solve also the bugs. So this also takes time, because you can't say, when you go live, my experience is also you need to spend time in order to save bugs, in order to make sure that this model is also working smoothly. And you don't have an endless time from your developers. Everything is on budget, and you also need to plan it. And when you plan 20 hours a week, but you need 30, you only have 20 hours a week, because this is what you agreed on the contract. And this is also what the developer actually makes sure he has, because probably he's working 30 hours on another project and he has another commitment. This is also quite often the case. We can't manage everything, so we only have time left and we only have budget left. So from this 5, we only can manage 2. So only need to go again into the discussion with the stakeholder, the customer itself, and then figure out what is the most important for him.
In my career as a software agency owner now, it has served me quite well to be transparent, because in the end, you cannot hide from the truth anyway. People will always see it eventually. So let's say there is a certain flaw in the quality of a product. It's better to go out with that early and tell the client there is a certain problem, we're going to fix it. It's way better than later on to see that problem popping up, causing damage, and it's always going to come back to us anyway. So we try to be very transparent in our process of development. Learning to prioritize is something that I always struggle with, because there's so many things to work on, and for me it's very difficult just to keep the order and see what's very important to work on first. Now with a tiny software team, it is even more important to get this part right, and I struggle with this quite a bit, because let's say there's a small software project in my company and there's only one developer, and then I give them 2 tasks at the same time, and I need to catch myself there and don't do that. And Carsten has his own opinion on this, and I really like how he puts this.
Because you need to understand, when some tool for you, maybe for your business model, let's say in the PLM system, in the product development, is not so important, but it is essential for the ERP to function, then also it should be on the top. So again, communication, and also actually weekly communication, it is super important and quite difficult. It's a challenge in every project when you work simultaneously in different IT projects within one company, because you always have to exchange.
And now we're coming to the topic of build versus buy. And now that's also a personal topic for me as well, because I'm an engineer myself and I know many engineers. I've worked with so many people and I always ask about their side projects. It's very interesting that most developers have either built a time tracking system or a project management system. This seems to be something that everybody just wants to solve on their own, because they think it's just a weekend of work. And of course it never is. It's never just a weekend. It always takes more time. It's still interesting how developers always err on the side of let's just do it ourselves because it's fast and because we have it under control. Now there's a certain rule of thumb here, but I first want to let Carsten speak.
There were several discussions actually where we come to the point and saying, okay, for this process, PLM is not involved, fine, but we can't find a tool who is doing that. So then we have to develop by ourselves. Yeah, so they also starting from scratch and developed, for example, they developed a Excel-based kind of quantity projection tool for the merchandising and planning to identify how many quantities per color for product A, B, Z should be bought.
Developers love do-it-yourself because, again, as I said, they have things under control. I now, as I'm more senior in my role, I've made many more projects. I always try to first hack a solution as much as possible by taking other packages or other softwares and bending them to our use case. There is a certain rule of thumb which I want to give you here. Make it in-house if it belongs to your USP. Let's say if I run a hiring service with really good candidate profiles, let's say imagining I would do this in the future, I would make sure that these candidate profiles are actually our proprietary system. If that's not the case, let's say if I'm just running a software agency and this agency builds things, so our hiring process is not the USP, we can just take a system from somewhere else. It doesn't need to be our own work. It would probably just slow us down and block a couple of developers for a year, and it's not a good use of our time. On the other side, yes, get stuff from a vendor. In all the other cases, there is one exception which I want to talk about. The exception is that sometimes you don't have software that you can actually use. Sometimes it's not the USP, but there's also no vendor for that software. In that case, yes, of course, you need to build it yourself, but ideally you keep it very minimal and you really limit it to maybe like an API connector or maybe just a small tool or something like that, and try to do it as minimal as possible, because most likely it's a waste of time. And the last point from Carsten is to establish a central role of communication. And this makes sense. It's something that I don't have too much experience, but it makes sense in his context, because when Carsten goes into a company and implements the PLM software, he often has to deal with a lot of stakeholders also from different teams. And then it makes sense to have one person who knows exactly what's going on and who's kind of the central role in things.
It's a tough part, but super important also. And also there, communication and visuality. Actually, you should have one part, one centralized actually controller, let's say, or whatever you like to call it, who also is frequently having meetings with the POs or Scrum Masters in this sense, but also reporting to the stakeholders, because they like to know what is going on. And they might have questions on a helicopter level. So I found this super important. And this was, for example, something what was missing. We had it, but it was too late implemented, and actually it took too long time to really work functional and good.
I heard this pattern or this principle from Jeff Bezos. He documents it in a principle called the single-threaded leadership. I had a quick research and I found it on Amazon.com on their website. So you can go here on aws.amazon.com. You would find the link everywhere we have the video. And it is actually here, single-threaded leaders. So their idea of Amazon is that one leader only has one role, one responsibility, and never multiple. Because if that's only one, this person can fully immerse themselves into that and fully make sure that they're hitting this one target. There is no conflict of interest. I really like this concept. Using these principles helps tiny teams get better. And I really endorse Carsten for giving us all this advice. Thanks again. Of course, it starts with the people. How do you find great people? If you want to hire great people, how about you watch this next video from my channel?